Welcome in, everyone. Today we're diving into a story that's been told and retold for centuries. The story of Prophet Nuh, or Noah, as some traditions know him. But we're going deeper than the Ark. We're looking at the world before the flood. And using Islamic tradition and the Quran as our guide, we're going to see how it's way more familiar than you might think.
It's easy to get caught up in the flood itself, right?
Yeah.
But the years leading up to it, that's where things get really interesting. The Quran really emphasizes this period of intense change, like watching a whole society shift, slowly but surely, from true devotion to, well, kind of a spiritual dead end.
What could cause that kind of a change? I mean, how does an entire society just lose its way like that?
The sources we're looking at describe a time right after the prophet Idris passed away. People were yearning for guidance, looking for that connection to something bigger than themselves. They wanted to learn from people who were deeply devoted to their faith.
Yeah, that makes sense. People always need something to believe in, someone to look to for guidance. It's like today, how we have our experts, our thought leaders, everyone's looking for that direction.
Exactly. And that need, that very human need, is what made them vulnerable.
Yeah.
The Quran actually describes Satan whispering to them, planting these little seeds of doubt, twisting their understanding of faith. And eventually, it led them to, well, idol worship.
Idol worship. Wait, how do you go from respecting someone for their devotion to that worshiping idols? That seems like a big jump.
It's a process, a really subtle one. It happens slowly across generations. At first, they built statues of these pious people just as tributes, like memorials. But as time went on and generations passed, that respect got morphed. The statues went from being symbols to being worshipped.
Wow. It's scary how easily things can get twisted, even when you start with good intentions. Like those rumors you hear or misleading headlines online. One minute it's nothing, and then all of a sudden, everyone's convinced it's the truth.
It's a slippery slope.
And that brings us to Prophet Nuh. He enters the picture at a pivotal moment.
Chosen by Allah to steer everyone back to righteousness, to the right path. Talk about a challenge, right? He was going up against generations of deeply ingrained beliefs. Imagine trying to reason with a society that's completely lost sight of its moral compass.
It's like he was fighting an uphill battle against, what do we call it now, an echo chamber, trying to make his message heard over all that noise. I can't even imagine the kind of pushback he got.
Oh, they push back, all right. The Quran even quotes them saying, "We see you, but a man like ourselves." They couldn't get past it. Here he was, this regular guy, trying to deliver this huge, important message.
It's so easy to dismiss someone's message if you don't like the messenger. It happens all the time. People hear good advice, but if it comes from someone they don't respect, they just brush it off.
Exactly. The funny thing is, the divine often speaks through the ordinary. The Quran highlights this amazing response Nuh had to all the doubters. He said something like, well, if this world is made for humans, why wouldn't the messenger be human too? Simple, but powerful, right?
What does he think?
It does. But sadly, even with his powerful words and his patience, a lot of people still weren't convinced, especially the wealthy and powerful. They just clung to their beliefs.
We all do it, though, right? Dig in our heels, refuse to see things from a different point of view, especially when it challenges what we think we know. And that's when things really took a turn, right? I mean, talk about a tough situation.
Yeah, that resistance that created this huge divide, and Nuh couldn't bridge it on his own.
Right.
That's when he received divine instruction to build the ark.
Oh, wow. So not only is he dealing with all this pushback, now he's got this massive construction project on his hands.
It really intensified the conflict, yeah.
But I'm trying to picture it, Nuh building this giant ark, and everyone's looking at him like, what is he doing?
It's almost comical, right? But at the same time, it shows just how strong his faith was. He kept going, even when people ridiculed him.
I bet that was tough. It must have been so hard knowing this truth that everyone else refused to see.
And having to build this huge physical reminder of it. The Quran doesn't gloss over that at all. You can really feel the weight of that burden on Nuh.
It makes you think about the emotional toll it must have taken on him, especially as if all that wasn't enough. The division, that inability to get people to see his side, it even extended to his own family.
Right, the Quran is very clear about that. His own son refused to listen, chose to take his chances on a mountain instead of the ark.
Ouch. That's heartbreaking.
It really drives home the point that just because you believe something strongly doesn't make it true. And sometimes, clinging to your own version of reality, it has consequences.
It's a good lesson for all of us. How many times have we dug in our heels, refusing to see things from someone else's point of view, even when it's someone we love?
It's a universal struggle, that tension between trusting your gut and listening to the people you care about.
Absolutely. So the flood then, it wasn't just some random natural disaster. It was symbolic.
Yeah, exactly. A consequence, for sure, but also a new beginning, a chance to wipe the slate clean and start over. And even though it's such a dramatic story, looking at the Quran, it's clear that the flood is just one part of a much bigger picture.
Yeah. It's not just about the ark or the animals or even the flood itself. It's about what Nuh represents within Islamic tradition. What did his message come to mean?
Precisely. The Quran uses Nuh's story to make us think. There are verses that talk about the importance of questioning what you're told, of using your critical thinking skills, of not just accepting things because everyone else does.
And isn't that more relevant now than ever? I mean, we're drowning in information these days. Everyone's got an opinion, a hot take, a different version of the truth. It's easy to just go with whatever feels easiest, you know?
It is. But Nuh's story reminds us that sometimes the hardest path, the one where you have to ask the tough questions and challenge your own assumptions, that's the path that leads to real understanding.
It makes you wonder, what are the idols we're clinging to today? The truths we've accepted without really questioning them.
It's a good question, one we should all be asking ourselves. But before we go too far down that road, let's think about this. We talk about those who rejected Nuh's message, the ones who wouldn't budge. But what about the people on the ark? The ones who heard Nuh and decided to trust him? What made them different?
Oh, that's a good point. Why did they get on board? They saw the same world everyone else did. Things seemed fine.
Exactly. It wasn't just blind faith. It took a lot of courage to get on that ark, to put their trust in something they couldn't see or fully understand.
They were going against the grain, trusting their gut when everyone else thought they were crazy. It must have taken a leap of faith to say, okay, we trust you. What do you think was going through their minds?
It's easy to forget about them, right? I mean, you've got this dramatic flood, all the doubters, the ark itself. But those who chose to board the ark, they had a different kind of courage.
How so?
Well, we think of courage as this big, heroic thing. But sometimes, real courage is quieter than that. It's about trusting your own judgment, even when everyone's telling you you're wrong. Think about it. They were living in the same world as everyone else. Everything seemed normal.
Right.
But they chose to listen to a different story, to put their faith in something they couldn't see with their own eyes.
It's like they were looking around at a world that seemed stable, but they knew deep down that something wasn't right.
Right. It takes guts to go against the crowd, to say, I'm betting on what I believe, even if no one else gets it.
And in a world that's constantly bombarding us with information, with everyone claiming to have the truth, that ability to think for yourself is so important.
Couldn't agree more. Nuh's message was all about questioning the status quo, about digging deeper for the truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And those who got on that ark, they weren't just escaping a physical flood. They were choosing a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at the world.
It's like they were saying, we're not just going to accept the easy answers. We're going to trust our gut and see where it leads us.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny. We often focus on the destruction of the flood, but the people on the ark, they represent hope. They chose to listen to that inner voice, that intuition.
And that's a powerful message for all of us. It's not always about blindly following. Sometimes it's about trusting your own judgment, even when it's scary.
Absolutely. So the story of Nuh, it's not just an ancient tale. It's a reminder that critical thinking, trusting your gut, those things matter now as much as ever.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It makes you wonder, what stories are we telling ourselves today that could use a little questioning, a little bit of that Nuh-inspired critical thinking?
It's a great question to ask ourselves and something to think about as we navigate this crazy world.
It is.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring.